Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Ask the Experts webinar focusing on an interdisciplinary look at ADHD. Before we get started, I just wanted to share the few notes about this webinar. You will be receiving the recording and the slides from today's webinar in the follow-up email going out tomorrow morning. Also, if you're having any technical difficulties throughout our webinar, we suggest you refresh your GoToWebinar page and re-enter the webinar. I just want to say thank you to each of our panelists for being here and being a part of this conversation, and I'll give each of them a moment to introduce themselves. Brittany, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself and your work?
Sure. My name is Brittany Hostetler, and I'm a mother of 3 and wife. I live in Indiana, and I have a bachelor's of science in psychology and a master of arts in positive psychology. So what initially kind of kickstarted the ADHD, like the passion for that, is when I started a brain health certification program. And it discussed a lot about ADHD and the brain. And I already knew that I had it. And our middle child, our 11-year-old, has ADHD as well. And once I really understood more of what it was, that's kind of where the passion got started. And so I'm always looking forward to furthering my education in some way. I'm already looking into a couple of other things. So I don't think I'm ever going to stop learning, but that's kind of where I'm at right now. And yeah, I'm just very grateful to be here. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much, Brittany. And Becca, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself and your work?
Yeah, my name is Becca King. I am a registered dietitian based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. I have ADHD myself, and I got started with my practice the beginning of the pandemic, and I was trying to figure out my place in the nutrition side of the world and reflecting on my own journey. And one of my really good friends that I was actually working with realized that no one was talking about the link between ADHD and food struggles. And so that's kind of how I got started. So, and I'm very much like Brittany, I'm a lifelong learner, and especially with things that resonate or I feel relate to me are just super interesting. And so it's been a really cool journey to dive deeper into understanding ADHD, and I'm super excited to be here as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for being here. We're really looking forward to this content, as I'm sure our attendees are as well. So let's jump right into those questions. Our first question comes from Nicole P. Can each of the panelists explain how they got started working with this community? Brittany, I'll start with you.
So as I kind of said earlier, my passion for ADHD didn't start until well after my master's, going through this brain health certification. And once I started to take that deep dive into the brain of someone with ADHD, I started to connect dots with myself and my son, and as well as some friends and family members. And that's when I guess everything just kind of got started. So, but with me, with my ADHD, I was diagnosed, I think I was maybe 11 or 12, somewhere around there. And for some reason, my mom did not want me on medication. And I know some people hear that and they automatically think, oh my gosh, she was anti-medicine, anti-Western. It wasn't anything like that. I think she was trying so hard to make me feel like there was nothing wrong, so to speak. And she would say things like, you know, oh, and sometimes it just takes you a little longer to learn to process certain information, or sometimes you have to study a little longer. And, you know, a lot of the things she was saying was true, but I think she was just trying so hard to make me feel like, you know, like I'm okay the way I am. And I honestly didn't do much with the ADHD for years, probably not until a couple years ago, when I finally was like, okay, I would like to get reevaluated finally, because I had been thinking about it for years. So I finally did, and yes, definitely ADHD. And so that was around the same time I was getting the brain health certification education going. And so things just kind of intertwined from there. and kind of where I'm at right now. I'm excited to keep learning about ADHD. I'm learning every single day. I feel like whether it's articles, research, other accounts like Becca's, I learn a lot from her too. And it's just really exciting to see what's coming out, I guess, from the educational side of ADHD.
Great, thank you so much. Becca, would you like to respond to this?
Yeah, I guess I kind of touched on it a little bit in the introduction. But yeah, the beginning of the pandemic, I got diagnosed at 19, so about 10 years ago, and I didn't really do a whole lot. Like I would say, I was medicated. I went to therapy, and looking back at my therapy, it was definitely like ADHD coaching because I was like, we don't really dig deep about anything. Like we're just talking about like goal setting and planning and like how to get things done. And looking back, I'm like, oh, he was just helping me with my ADHD, and I didn't really realize it. But yeah, it was at the beginning of the pandemic that I had started thinking about the connection with ADHD and food. And there was nobody really talking about it on social media, and every Facebook support group that I was in for like women with ADHD, a lot of them had shared that they struggled with binge eating or disordered eating or just the executive functioning around being able to cook and feed ourselves. And realizing that, I was like, there's no one talking about this. And even sometimes in the research, it's just like a little footnote that like people with ADHD might struggle more with eating disorders. And I'm like, this is a really big thing that we should be addressing. And so I just had a lot of free time at the beginning of the pandemic. So I got to use it and my lovely hyper-focused skills to learn as much as I could about ADHD and continue learning every day, which is really awesome. Yeah, and I think it's really cool to see there's getting to learn from other people's lived experiences and the research and all of that that's out there. It's a nice kind of way to combine it all together.
Great, thank you so much. And we've definitely seen, even in my own research, that this is a never-ending conversation. We need to amplify this and make sure that we're opening this conversation to everybody and not making it as taboo of a topic as it used to be. So thank you both very much. Jumping into our next question, what are your top resources or trainings that would be helpful for those getting started working with this population? Brittany?
So for me personally, I really enjoy looking into Attitude magazine. If you have a website, they put their, like if they're referencing studies, they always reference them more towards the bottom. I also like CHADD, and that is CHADD. So I actually really do. I at first went more towards Attitude, but now I'm kind of liking the way CHADD is set up. I really do love them both. I really do. But I feel like I've been leaning a little more on CHADD lately. And, you know, honestly, I feel like some of these YouTube lectures, like Dr. Hollowell, oh shoot, Russell Barkley. Sorry, couldn't think of him. Dr. Russell Barkley, he has so many lectures where I feel like there's some that are an hour, 2 hours long, and some of them are broken down into several videos where you can just, I mean, he is brilliant and you learn so much from him. And there is so much information on there, even on websites, and there's books. And so that's kind of what I've been leaning towards. And sometimes I'll look into a research study. So my husband just sent something to me the other day. It was very, very interesting, a very interesting study. And I'm wanting to look into it a little bit more. And I don't think it's something conclusive just yet, but it's kind of like opening this door, like, okay, this might be going on with people with ADHD. So let's dig a little further into it. And it had to do with the eyes. They did an electroretinogram, and I guess maybe there's more impulses in our eyes or something. It was very, very interesting. And so I just feel like I said, it's just every day you're always learning more. And so, like I said, if I see an interesting study or if I see something, let's say Becca, if she posts something and I'm not aware of it, like if I learn something new, I'll kind of dig into that a little more. And so, yeah, I would say Attitude, CHADD. I really like Dr. Hollowell and Dr. Russell Barkley as well.
Great, thank you so much. Jump into next.
I'll second Brittany with those. Those are some of my favorite resources as well.
Great. Question 3, what is diet's impact on symptoms of ADHD? Becca, we'll start with you.
So I think it varies a little bit from children to adults in terms of impact. And there's some children who diet really does impact ADHD, but I think a lot of it isn't necessarily just the food, but our eating patterns around from day to day. Because even for a lot of my clients, there's a lot of inconsistent eating patterns or going too long without eating, dealing with the side effects if you are on a stimulant medication, how that can impact your diet as well. For adults, there really isn't a lot of studies in terms of how diet actually impacts symptoms. It's usually just like these surveys of what do adults with ADHD eat, and usually it's like they have a poorer quality of diet. And I think usually that just comes from the executive functions around food, of being able to plan and organize and actually cook nutritious meals for ourselves. And a lot of times it's what's the quickest, fastest thing, and usually that's not going to be the most nutritious options for us. There are some children who do respond though well to dietary changes, but I don't think it's necessarily across the board. So I think sometimes taking an individual approach to see if certain foods or things like that impact symptoms.
Great, thank you. And Brittany, did you have a response to this?
Yes, and I agree with everything Becca is saying. I think a lot of it is the patterns. Like even just thinking of myself, and Becca, I think you probably can resonate with this, that you can go a long time without eating, and it's like your body could be giving you signals, but you're not processing, and it's like you're not paying attention. And so you go a long time, and then pretty soon you're irritable, and you're crashing, and you're having brain fog, and your blood sugar may be out of whack, and suddenly, okay, maybe I'm hungry. Like you're finally getting it, but then you can eat a lot in one sitting. Yeah. And that's where kind of the pattern is coming from sometimes. Just one pattern. There's a lot of different things that can be going on. And I think I'll piggyback off of kind of what you were saying on how diet, it is different for everybody. There are some people, they swear going off of dairy and gluten significantly help them, whereas some maybe not so much. Or such as with my son, it really does seem like the red dye 40, like the red dyes, it will just make him extremely irritable. And it's one thing that we just really try to stay away from, because it really does seem to impact him. But maybe for some people, it doesn't. And I do feel like us as ADHDers, we do like to go towards the simple carbs a lot. And there's nothing wrong with carbs. I want to say that right away. There's nothing wrong with eating carbs. But I know for me, like that's what I have to consciously tell myself, to add in the protein throughout the day. Because if I don't, I'm just going to keep reaching for the carbs and the sugar. So that's something I have to be mindful of, is to be sure I add in enough of that protein throughout the day. And I noticed that with a lot of people with ADHD, like they have to tell themselves to add in that protein, because they are also just wanting to grab the sugar and the carbs all day.
Yeah, it can be a way of self-medicating almost. For some of my clients diagnosed later in life, they're usually women who are like, I am always snacking, or I eat because I'm bored, and they don't understand why. They're like, I know I'm not hungry. And then once they get diagnosed with ADHD, they realize that it's the link between needing something that's stimulating. And I think over the past 2 years, especially being home a lot more and not having access to as many things that we do find stimulating, that food has definitely come to the forefront as a tool for a lot of people. So
right. And what do you think about the gluten and dairy? I'm personally curious what you think, because I mean I kind of see both sides, I guess.
I think that's again where it's like very individual, of like, if you want to try eliminating it for your kids, you can. And if you notice a difference, then maybe it's something you want to consider continuing with. But yeah, I think not everyone always responds to it. So I think, again, just trying to figure out if you notice a difference, just like noticing with your son, like the red dye does impact his symptoms. So we're going to be mindful of like trying to avoid that in our food. And same thing with gluten and dairy, of like, I don't think everyone that has ADHD needs to be gluten-free or dairy-free. I know for me personally, like dairy is a reliable source of protein and doesn't really impact my symptoms. So I definitely consume dairy, but I know, again, it's very individualized.
Great, thank you so much. We'll jump into the next question. What are the best holistic approaches to treating ADHD? Becca, we'll start with you.
I think mindfulness practices just in general can be a really great complementary approach to medicine. Even if you don't choose to take medication, I think it can be hard to practice mindfulness as an ADHDer, but it can make such a difference in your life, and being able to be more present or to think through things a little bit more and slow down. As one of my clients had described it, he was a drummer, and his therapist described it as like kind of slowing down the rhythm with things, so that you can actually do what you want to do without, maybe, especially if you're an impulsive type of person, sometimes I think it can really help. So.
Great. And Brittany?
So I have to agree about the mindfulness, and because our minds, it seems like we just don't stop. Like even if we're physically sitting and not doing anything, our minds are constantly going and we're constantly getting distracted, and then we're moving on to the next thing. And, we are very disorganized people, a lot of us, not every single person with ADHD is. But when you're constantly doing this, it can it can really stack up against you. And so that's where you can get the feelings of you're feeling super overwhelmed. Maybe you are keeping track of what is going on. Like you don't realize you're not writing things down, let's say, so you don't know you have this appointment tomorrow, and maybe you're saying yes to too many people about too many things. And so that's where things kind of, you're adding on too much at once. And so sometimes we just need to pause. We need to pause and ask ourselves, like, okay, what is it that I need right now? Okay, do I need to say yes to this? Do I need to say yes to what this person is asking of me? Okay, wait, so do I need to eat? Well, actually, I haven't eaten in 5 hours. Maybe I need to go and snack on something, or just even practicing mindfulness as far as getting some things written down for the next week, let's say. And that can obviously help you remember what is coming if it's all right there. But a lot of it is challenging when for me at least, where, yeah, for me to pause, for me to like think and be present in the moment, that can be very challenging. But if you do take some time out of your day to do it, I think that can be really beneficial in so many ways.
Yeah, I know for me, like when I first started meditation, I was like, or the idea of it at first, I was like, I can't do this. Like my brain never shuts off. Like you have no thoughts when you meditate. You're just supposed to sit there and be zen, and it's okay. And then realizing like, actually, it isn't necessarily that I don't have thoughts. It's just being able to focus my attention on my breath. And then when I do have thoughts, being able to refocus back on my breath, and just learning that and being able to slow down with meditation was like so helpful. And it doesn't necessarily, if you do meditate for ADHDers, it doesn't always have to just be sitting and doing deep breathing exercises. It could be walking, going for a walk in a park and really paying attention to, the trees and the sounds and, and the sky and everything else that's going on around you. And that can be another way of just practicing meditation in a way that can help, especially if you're hyperactive. That can help.
Absolutely. It took me a good few months to really get into it, and to really understand what it was that I was trying to do. it
Yeah.
really does take some time when you have that hyperactive mind and the racing thoughts. It really does take some time. And, you know, everybody is different. This kind of just made me think of something I did a week ago at random. I think it was after 10 o'clock. I'm like, oh, I'm going to take my dog on a bike ride. I'm going to hold it. So I like went on a bike ride, but I had a leash on him and he kind of jogged as I went on a bike ride. But I'm wanting to do it more because it was so peaceful. It was like, you know, the sun was down, nobody was outside, nobody is going to stop you. You don't hear all these sounds. You don't, it was just very, very peaceful. And so it kind of made me think, I want to do this more often. Like this might be my time of day to do something. And so everybody is different. And sometimes you have to play around with different things to figure out what works for you. But yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Jump into the next question. Is there supportive evidence of dietary suggestions or nutritional supplementation supports those diagnosed with ADHD? Becca, we'll start with you.
So this area, I would say, of research is very difficult, or the study designs with dietary interventions and ADHD are very difficult because you can't do the gold standard, like you can't do a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial with some of these dietary interventions because especially there's one called the few foods diet, and the parents, because there's so many foods, they can't sneak, you know, unlike a supplement, they can't sneak it into the food. And so obviously the parents are going to tell if their kid's diet has been changed in some way with those studies. So again, there is some research to show with the few foods diet that for kids who don't respond to medication or might be too young for medication, that diet can potentially be beneficial for figuring out what foods might trigger symptoms. As a dietitian, I'm very cautious with that diet. It can take at least a year to figure out what a kid's trigger foods are, and it's very, very restrictive. So if a parent was to want to do that diet, I would definitely probably work with a dietitian who specializes in ideally in ADHD and nutrition, but so that way you can make sure the kid's not getting deficiencies nutritionally. And the other piece of it is, I think, because it is really restrictive and people who have ADHD are at a higher risk of eating disorders, that it's something to be very cautious of, especially like if you have a family history of eating disorders or things like that. It might be something to be cautious of. And it's just very challenging to stick to. A lot of the research is the parents didn't have to prepare the meals or do any of that stuff. The meals often are prepared for them and given to them. And so if a parent also has ADHD, these diets might be very challenging to implement for the kid. And it's just, there's another thing I wanted to add. Let me think for a second. And for kids, like the foods that are acceptable on this diet or during the first intervention piece, if kids do have any sensory sensitivities or are, you know, picky eaters, it can be really challenging to get them to buy in and want to eat them. Artificial food colorings, again, that's another one where some people do find eliminating them is helpful with symptoms, but some people just don't notice a difference either. So supplementation, some people, again, find it helpful to supplement with polyunsaturated fatty acids or like fish oil supplements. The research is still says that there needs to be a little more research to support it, but there are a lot of clinicians like Dr. Hollowell, I know, is one who does do a lot of like supplementation with their patients.
Great, thank you so much. Brittany?
So I do think one important factor into this is making sure, and you kind of already stated this, where you want to make sure there aren't nutritional deficiencies. And for anyone that has gone through an iron deficiency or anemia, I mean, that alone can make you, I mean, you're exhausted, you have the brain fog, you sometimes go through depression and you can't pay attention, you can't focus. And so even just that one can really make you feel completely out of balance. So I do think it is very important to address any potential nutritional deficiencies, and of course that's something you would have to address with your healthcare provider. I know you mentioned the omega-3 as well. It does seem like research, it isn't completely, kind of like what you were already saying about the research. It's like we absolutely can't say for sure yet, but there are some studies that show that it can be helpful. And healthy fats in general are good for the brain anyway. So not just fish oil, but even coconut oil, olive oil. Becca, I'm sure you can think of some, walnuts, avocados,
Yeah.
Healthy fats. I mean, our brain, what is it? Our brain is made of 60% of fat. Our brain needs fat. It just needs to be more along with healthy fats.
Yes.
And I know I kind of mentioned the protein before. Just making sure that you're getting enough protein throughout the day is very important. It can help stabilize that blood sugar too. And trying to think about, and just the typical things we always hear, fruits, vegetables, kind of having that balanced diet, but don't restrict yourself so much that, you're telling yourself you're never going to eat a cookie or a brownie again or have a slice of pizza, because more than likely that's going to backfire, and that's not what you want. So I would just be careful about restricting yourself too much, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I would second that. And I think it's the challenging piece is that a lot of the recommendations are just following that apply for like the dietary guidelines for Americans, like the general recommendations for healthy eating are kind of very similar to what's recommended for ADHD. It's just being able to actually do it consistently that is the challenging piece I think for a lot of people, and that often gets overlooked sometimes. It's like, just do these things, and it's like, okay, but how to do them? For a lot of my clients, it's not usually they don't know what to eat. It's how do I prepare vegetables in a way that's easy for me, or how do I remember to use things in my fridge before they all go bad, and things like that. And so I think it's really important too, because a lot of us grow up and to be adults with ADHD, and a lot of the recommendations I feel like sometimes don't account for that piece of like, hey, if you're a parent who has ADHD and is feeding a child with ADHD, it might be really challenging for you to prepare a balanced meal consistently, and that and just recognizing that might be something you struggle with a little bit more too.
Right. And I know as a mother, and anyone that's a parent on here, that we beat ourselves too up and we feel guilty if we, just have whatever, I guess, like order a pizza, or just, I am done for the day. This is what I'm doing and that's it. And then somehow we're feeling a little guilty for it. I think that kind of needs to stop, and I'm working on it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm absolutely working on that, but that's something that I think a lot of people with ADHD struggle with. The overthinking and feeling bad about ourselves and feeling guilty, and we're not doing enough. We could be doing more, and it's just a lot of layers to it, really.
Yeah, I think there's so much, especially that the all or none mindset with things of like getting too stuck in it of like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing the right thing all the time and freaking out about it. And it's like, if all I have is the executive function to order pizza tonight, if we're not ordering pizza 7 nights a week, it's okay to have it every once in a while. And it's not going to mean all of a sudden we're going to become unhealthy because we have pizza all night of the week,
Yep.
Great, thank you so much. Jump into the next question. How do we assist families with accepting ADHD and creating an environment for success for their children and for themselves? Brittany?
So a lot of this is going to depend on the person. I guess, the first thing that comes to mind is sensory issues. There are some people, they're extroverts. They have to go out and seek. They have to have all this input, like they're constantly seeking it. Maybe they're the type that are always talking to someone, always giving hugs, or always just kind of looking for the next thing. Whereas some, maybe they're the complete opposite. They're like, okay, this is too much for me. This is too much input. There's too much coming at me at once. I can't do this. And so their environments are going to be different from one another as far as what their needs are. So I think that's the first thing is communication. Always communication, which I do feel like sometimes we have a hard time conveying our thoughts. Like I do, at least I kind of have a hard time putting my thoughts into words. But communication, I think, is key. And maybe children, sometimes maybe they don't know how to put their thoughts into words. But I think at least opening that door, especially having the one-to-one, like if it's just you and them, and kind of like opening that communication, they'll tell you more than what we think. I noticed, I mean, even kids without ADHD, you get them alone and they're wide open to you. So I do think communication is key, and routine, kids in general, I think, thrive in routine, but especially people with ADHD. And, there's little things like not having devices or TVs in their rooms, let's say, because that can kind of interfere with sleep. And, they're going to push the later bedtime, keeping the TV on just a little bit longer. Okay, I'm not watching, I'm just listening while I'm going to sleep. And it can just create this snowball effect. Declutter, which I know is really, really hard. It's hard for me. But when there's a lot of things everywhere with, I guess, children, let's say, in their rooms, it's going to be very distracting in general. So if they're doing homework, or if they're even trying to clean their room, or they're trying to go to sleep, that kind of stuff can be distracting or keep them awake or keep them from doing what they're supposed to be doing. And it just depends on the child too. I mean, that was just one example I could think of as far as like the sensory issues.
Great, thank you so much. We'll jump into the next question. How can you manage or support adult ADHD? Becca, we'll start with you.
I think one of the things that was really helpful for myself was having acceptance for things that I might struggle with or might be more challenging for me. I kind of have to pick and choose my battles, especially working from home. It can be the urge to, I should clean my apartment or I should do my work activities, kind of, push and pull with myself, and realizing that, it's okay for me. Like if my apartment's not perfectly spotless, like at the end of the day, if it's clean enough for what I feel is good for me, like that's okay, versus like the standard that I have in my head of like maybe what a more neurotypical person might consider clean might not be what's realistic for me on a day-to-day basis. If someone's about to come over, chances are I could get that my apartment clean in a very short period of time that someone who's maybe more neurotypical would find as clean. But I think too, of finding community as well, I think is really huge, of other people who have ADHD. I think having community can be huge, especially if you don't know a lot of people in your life. I think that social media is really great for finding that connection with others if you don't have them in person with you, because I think for a lot of, especially my clients, it's people just don't understand them, and being able to feel like there's not something wrong with you, it's just your brain works a little bit differently, or you might need more technology, whether it's reminders to, setting alarms to remind yourself, even to just check in and be like, hey, have I drank water today? Have I had a snack? Do I need to get up and stretch? And I think routines as well can be very helpful as an adult with ADHD. Those would be some of the biggest things, I think.
Great, thank you so much. Brittany?
And so I know you had mentioned the social media, there's Facebook groups, there's accounts that we follow, there are people we connect with, like we have connected, and that is wonderful. I think education is really, really important. Like when you're understanding what is going on with the brain, and especially of someone with ADHD, then things start to make sense. And it's like, okay, I'm not making this up. I'm not just being lazy. I'm not just being overly sensitive. I'm not like, there's a reason maybe why I'm having these racing thoughts. You start to, once you understand what's going on with yourself, then you can kind of go from there as to what you need to do about it. But it's hard to know what you need to do about it without first having an understanding of what is going on in the first place. And so I do think, like I said, I mean, just whether it's in person or online, I think the community is wonderful and very, very supportive. And as long as you feel like you're learning from it and people are understanding, you feel like you can ask questions and have those conversations, that community, I think, is very, very important. And as far as, it's challenging, Becca. I know that you were saying some people just don't understand what ADHD really is. And sometimes maybe they view it as you just being lazy, you're using it as an excuse, it's not a real thing, you just want to be on medication, the whole 9 yards. I mean, we've all heard it before. But again, I think ultimately it just kind of comes back to the educational side. And the more you learn, the more you can implement in your own life. But I do want to caution, because I know often we want to do all the things at once, and then it gets overwhelming, and then we give up. We're like, okay, screw it. I did it for 2 days, it's not working. I tried these dozen things, and it's not working. Slowly implement a little bit here and there so that it's doable, and maybe it becomes a habit over time. And then add something else. Don't add in all the things to where it gets so overwhelming that you just quit.
Yeah, my ADHD coach, you'd call it, what's your 1% when we were trying to work on making changes versus like trying to do it all at once. It was like, what's one small change you can make versus trying to change everything all at once. And I know it's so easy, even for me, like with my clients, they're like, I want to fix everything about my eating all at once. And it's like, you are going to get overwhelmed and you're going to stop doing all of it and not be able to make any progress, versus like maybe it's just focusing on adding, 1 serving of vegetables a day, or focusing on drinking a little bit more water this week, and just kind of slowly making those changes. I agree. It can be hard to have that mindset as an ADHD because we can be very all or none, but it can be very beneficial to actually being able to keep up with things, because being, as Dr. Hollowell says, we're consistently inconsistent, and I think making big changes makes it really hard to stick with it long term.
Right, and you can hardly, it's too hard to build up a habit when you're going too big. And
Yeah.
I mean, I know with a client, she's big about like having a certain room clean, but she gets overwhelmed about it like being a certain way. So it's like an all or nothing, kind of like what happens with us. Well, I'm going to do it all at once, or I'm not going to do any of it at all. And so I'm like, okay, well, let's set a timer. Okay, let's set a timer even for 15 minutes. And that's it. 15 minutes is better than nothing, but at least you're going in and telling yourself 15 minutes and then I'm done. Well, the week after, she's like, well, that didn't go so well. Could I start with 5? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And she was shocked that I said that. And I'm like, absolutely, because you're starting somewhere. If you can get that down, then add, continue on 7 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, and go from there. If 15 is too much, it's too much.
Yeah.
Go down to 5 minutes. Like just start small where it's manageable and build from there.
Yeah, I think it can feel really weird too, to like, even like I was talking with some clients about movement, and they were like, if I'm not going to the gym for a certain amount of time and doing certain exercises, it doesn't count and I won't do any form of exercise or movement, versus like, hey, I can get have a client and she was like doing something very similar. She was like, I'm getting on my elliptical for 5 minutes in the morning. And if I feel like going longer, I can go longer, but that's my, that feels comfortable for me to get started and actually build this into my morning routine of something I do for myself. And I was like, that's incredible. And I think it's cool to see, or even be supportive with clients or patients if you do work with them that have ADHD, of like, hey, starting somewhere, even if it feels really tiny and small, is a great place to start. And it's not nothing.
Great, thank you so much. I want to thank both of our panelists for these insightful responses and resources that both of you gave. And I just want to jump right into our final thoughts section, where both of our panelists can share anything that they found super insightful and want to share with our community. So I will start with you, Brittany, and then we'll move into Becca. I'm sorry.
Is this, okay, so, okay, final thoughts, okay. I guess my final thoughts, what I'm really excited about with the awareness and education on ADHD is I'm noticing that we are starting to focus a little more on the strengths and what we can do versus I feel like back when we were kids, and it's even still happening now where it's like, well, you're not doing well in physics. You're getting a C in physics. So we need to fix that, because if you can't do well in this and you can't go to college, like that's it, you will not be successful. And I feel like there was a lot more negative input before about ADHD, whereas now it's kind of like, okay, so maybe we are different in some ways, but you know what? There's a lot of strength to it as well. And I'm noticing a little more focus on that. And I think I personally think that's exciting for, the kids' generation, like our kids' generation and future generations.
Yeah, I think that, looking at our strengths and it not being something like I feel like there's a lot less fixing people or trying to fix ADHD versus like accepting it and being like, here's an area I really excel at, or I'm really good at, or passionate about, and helping them lean on those things. I think that it is really exciting to see that. And I think just seeing that there's more accommodations or more acceptance for things of like, hey, it's okay if I do something a little bit differently than my peers, or being able to get the support you need, whether that's in the school environment or a work environment that can help you actually do the things you want to do versus, getting told all of the things like you're lazy or you can't meet deadlines, or there's just some, what's wrong with you, of being like, hey, maybe I need a different work environment, or I need some other, supports there to help me. I think it's really awesome to see it. And I think, it's just feel like there's a lot more positive shift happening with it versus it being this terrible thing that needs correcting. So
there's definitely a shift. I think there's definitely a shift in, just because a child can't, or I don't want to say can't, but maybe doesn't do well in certain areas, there is something that child is good at and is, I want to say, maybe is better at than their peers. There's something that they're passionate about, something they're good at, and if you let them take off with that, they will go far. They will. Like, you almost can't stop a person with ADHD. There's a passion and a hyper focus, and they're hyper fixated on something. Like, you can't stop them.
Yes. I definitely can agree with you on that.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. And that's something that we love doing with these webinars, is taking the taboo aspect of that and opening up the conversation, not only to clinicians, but also the clients themselves, and making sure that they feel comfortable having this conversation and opening up a forum for them. So thank you again, Brittany and Becca, for that. I just want to say that this webinar will be sent out in our follow-up email going out tomorrow. You'll have access to the recording and the slides. And thank you again to each of our panelists. And thank you all for the hard work that you do each and every day. We'll see you again very soon.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you, Becca. Thank you, Nick.